Who are the Sadducees, and why are they asking Jesus about the resurrection? Do you know who the Sadducees are? They are mentioned a couple times in the Gospels. At one point in the Gospels, in fact, it was this very group that came to Jesus and put forth a question. The question they asked Jesus is about marriage and the resurrection. We're going to analyze their question very soon. But before that, please think about this. Is there such a thing as a good question and a bad question? There's a popular saying that says, there is no such thing as a bad question. Is this true? Perhaps. All questions are good questions, except that some are better than others. And so throughout the gospel readings, you see many different people ask Jesus various questions. Think about some of the questions that people ask Jesus, right? Questions such as, Lord, will many be saved? Or, Lord, what is the greatest commandment? Or, Lord, why do you speak in parables? Or the Pharisees, for example, who asked Jesus, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any cause whatsoever? These are some of the many questions different people ask Jesus. And there are different groups too that ask Jesus various different questions. Now, in this gospel reading, there's a group called the Sadducees, and they put forth a question for Jesus. And we're going to explore that right now. So I invite you to turn your Bibles or turn to the Gospel of St. Luke chapter 20, verses 27 to 38. You see, in this gospel passage, the Sadducees came to Jesus with a question. Now, St. Luke already tells us very clearly at the beginning here in this passage who the Sadducees are in the gospel reading. He says to us that the Sadducees are those who do not believe in the resurrection. So let's think about this for a moment. If they do not believe in the resurrection, then why are they asking about the resurrection? What's their point? Is it so that they can gain more faith and then believe in the resurrection? Or is there something more to this question? Perhaps the Sadducees aren't interested in an answer. They simply want to trap Jesus. Now, we know the various different groups who try to do that, right? The scribes, the Pharisees, they want to trap Jesus. And so does this group here, the Sadducees. So allow me to fill you in on some details. St. Luke, for example, tells us that the Sadducees deny the resurrection. Take a look at verse 27. In the Acts of the Apostle, which by the way is also written by St. Luke, he also tells us that they do not believe in angels or spirits either. So what do the Sadducees believe in? Well, they're mainly a political group during the time of Jesus. They make laws and rules for others to follow. And if you think about this, they make laws and rules and yet they propose questions for Jesus. That's very interesting because the question they have for Jesus is precisely based on their law, right? Think about the book of Deuteronomy, where it talks about various different laws. I invite you to turn to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 25, verses 5 through 8, right? It states pretty clearly the very question that they want to ask Jesus. And so I want to just fill you in on this detail here. Here's what Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 5 through 8 says. Here's what it says. When brothers live together and one of them dies without a son, the widow of the deceased shall not marry anyone outside the family, but her husband's brother shall come to her, marrying her and performing the duty of a brother-in-law. The firstborn son she bears shall continue the name of the deceased brother, that his name may not be blotted out from Israel. And it continues, but if a man does not want to marry his brother's wife, she shall go up to the elders at the gate and say, my brother-in-law refuses to perpetuate his brother's name in Israel and does not intend to perform his duty towards me. Thereupon the elders of the city shall summon and speak to him. Right, if you take a look at this, so this is a setup for the question that the Sadducees want to ask Jesus. Now, this is very descriptive. So anyways, this is the very law the Sadducees want Jesus to explain. And so here I'd like to share seven very important points about this gospel reading the Sadducees bringing this question to Jesus to ask. Point number 1 is the question of the Sadducees. What did the Sadducees ask Jesus? Well, they right in the gospel reading, they come to Jesus and they said, "Teacher, Moses wrote for us, if someone's brother die, leaving a wife but no child, his brother must take up the wife and raise the descendants for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers. The first married a woman, died childless, then the second, then the third, all childless, and then in the end, she dies as well." Now, here's their question. At the resurrection, whose wife will that woman be? For all 7 brothers have been married to her. Now, do you see the problem with this question? The Sadducees are trying to apply the law, this human law that they've created, to the resurrection, that is life after death, which is of divine nature. And after presenting the usual scenario, which is part of the law of Leviticus, which you can find in Deuteronomy 25, as I mentioned, the question the Sadducees bring forth is this: at the resurrection, whose wife will she be? For all 7 brothers have been married to her. There is this very strangeness to this question, right? It sounds kind of silly. Who cares, right? Or what's the point, etc., right? Which then brings us to point number 2. Point number 2, the Sadducees were not interested in searching for the truth. Usually when you ask a question, you're searching for answers. It seems here the Pharisees aren't really interested in that, right? So what's their purpose and intention of asking this question? It's very strange, right? Take a look. What is their purpose and intention? After all, they don't believe in the resurrection, so why ask? It seems pretty clear then, in the context of this gospel reading here, that they were interested in trapping Jesus, right? In tricking Jesus. They want to trap him so they can use it to their advantage, so they can show to everyone how foolish Jesus is, and how the whole concept of the resurrection is foolish as well. And so again, you see the Sadducees aren't interested in the resurrection, and they'll do whatever it takes to make it clear to everyone that the resurrection is not possible. But as we will see, Jesus makes it possible. Point number 3, the Sadducees believe that life ends at death. This is true. The Sadducees do not believe in the afterlife. So they believe that life ends at death. And no resurrection, no afterlife, nothing, right? So for them, this life is all there is. This is it. Once you die, that is the end. That's it. Now, if we really think about it, right, it sounds pretty tragic if this life is all there is. If this life is all there is, what's the point in living? What's the point of living a good life? What's the point of helping, loving others? Many philosophers throughout the ages have really wrestled with this question. What's the point of life? What's the meaning of life? There has to be something more than just this life, etc., 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 right? And we can go on and on and on with that. Now, here's my point. Many people today as well believe this very thing. That is, this life is all there is, and once you die, that is it. Now, if you really think about it, right? It sounds very sad and without any hope. But for those who believe that there is more to this life, that there is this afterlife, they have that hope to always live their life with fullness and with great potential, and looking forward to that which is greater to come, right? Life with God forever in heaven. Let's move on. Point number 4, the problem with applying marriage, which is of this world here, with the age to come. As I've shared before already, the problem with the question the Sadducees presented is regarding marriage, which is of this world here. And they gave this scenario of 7 brothers marrying this one woman, and then eventually she dies as well. And they're trying to take whatever works here in this world and apply it to heaven, which will not work, right? The question is about marriage, but in the end, it's about a particular law of marriage. And when we try to apply it to the heavenly side, it just won't work. And that's basically Jesus' response, right? He says, the children of this age marry and remarry, but those who are deemed worthy to attain to the coming age and to the resurrection of the dead, neither marry nor are given in marriage. They can no longer die, for they are like angels, and they are children of God because they are the ones who will rise. You see, the problem is when we try to use human reason to apply how this all works with God. Unfortunately, they break down. So to use this description of this world to try to explain the next world, which is the afterlife, just won't work because it's very different. When we talk about human relationships like marriage, it's of this world. You can't apply it to the next world. Point number 5, the importance of verse 35 in this passage right here. Take a look at verse 35. And let me ask you this question. Do you notice what's so important about this verse? Can you catch it? Pay attention to it again. Those who are deemed worthy to attain to the coming age and to the resurrection of the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. See, Jesus is making clear here that not everyone is deemed worthy to attain to the coming age. In other words, not everyone will get to go to heaven. Not everyone will experience the resurrection, but only the righteous. So here Jesus is telling us two things. Number 1, the resurrection is real. And number 2, not everyone will experience the resurrection, especially those who do not believe, like the Sadducees, for example. Point number 6. God is the God of the living. You know, when Moses asked God who he is, right? If we go back to the Old Testament, God says, I am who am. Now take a look at verse 37 and verse 38. Here's what Moses says, that the dead will rise. Even Moses made it known in the passage about the burning bush. Keep going, right? When he called Lord, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And he is not God of the dead, but of the living. For to him all are alive. Now Jesus is saying that God is the living God. He is living, in other words. There is no more death than there is more death. More to death than just death itself, right? Death is not the end. And so here's the point. Jesus is quoting Moses, and question is, well, why? Because he wants to show the Sadducees who believe in Moses, right? The Sadducees believe in the 5 books of the Pentateuch. And so if Jesus puts Moses' name in there, they would more readily believe, right? And Jesus is telling them, Moses believed that God is a living God, that God can never die, right? And that nobody dies because there is this resurrection. So if Moses believed in the resurrection, then why don't you, right? That's what Jesus is telling them. And you see the logical inconsistency here, because Moses does believe in the resurrection, that he has risen, he is resurrected. Think of the transfiguration, for example, right? So if that's the case, then, well, wait a minute, why don't the Sadducees believe in the resurrection? Now, that's a big question mark right there, right? Which then leads me to my final point. Point number 7, Jesus fulfills the resurrection prophecy. You see, if you want proof of the resurrection, look to Jesus. He suffered and died on the cross, and all the historical evidence points out that Jesus is a real person, that he walked this earth, that he suffered and died on the cross. That's all evidence, and that he rose from the dead, right? His disciples all testify to all of this. They say Jesus died, but that he rose from death. And it's because of this very belief in the resurrection of Christ that all the disciples, they went everywhere to proclaim the good news that Jesus Christ is risen. And so in the Gospel of John, chapter 11, verses 25 to 26, Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he dies, may live. And all those who live and believe in me will never die. Jesus himself shows us that death is not the end. You see, death is not the end. That he conquered death and that he rose from death. You know, every day, all of us move closer and closer and closer to death. That's the reality. And how we choose to live our life is truly up to us. And where do we choose to believe in Jesus and his promise of the resurrection or not is truly up to us as well. Because ultimately, how we choose to live our life here on earth has eternal consequences. May God bless you.